Hey guys, luckily I can't see anybody and that kind of makes me happy. So I'm just doing one quick interview. I kind of, not insisted, but I was like, he's my hero growing up as a chef. When I was about 20, I used to carry one of his books around under my arm every time I went to cooking college and into work. If you haven't bought the book, it's about 20, 30 years old. It's called White Heat. It's a book by a guy called Pierre. He's flown all the way over from London to meet us. He's the youngest person ever to have 3 Michelin stars. So if anybody is here in the restaurant industry, which many of you are, you'll know that getting 1 Michelin star is ridiculous. Getting 3 is insane, and getting 3 of them by the age of sort of 27, 28 is off the chart. So he's probably one of the most important chefs of his generation, and his name is Pierre, and he's going to come out and chat to us. I think you might be there, actually. So, Marco.
Sorry about this, sorry.
We're here in Dublin. You have 2 restaurants here. But what I'd like to get back to is where it all kicked off. I kind of introduced you as the youngest person ever to have 3 Michelin stars, but where was the first spark of fire when you were a young guy in terms of getting into the kitchen?
Sorry about that, that was rather loud. Wow. I just had to do that. Now, how it all started was I was 16 years old and it was time to leave school. I left without qualifications. And my old man was a chef, and so was my uncle, and my grandfather was a chef. When you come from humble beginnings in the sort of 70s, from the world that I came from in Yorkshire, you tended to follow your father's footsteps. So he gave me 50p and sent me to Harrogate. And what 50p was, it was my bus fare on the 36 bus to Harrogate and back. Bought me a bun and a cup of tea. And he told me to knock on the back doors of kitchens. So I did what he said. I put on my Sunday best and I went to Harrogate. It was the most daunting task of my life. And the first hotel I found was the Hotel St. George. And I went round the back and I saw this turquoise door. I thought that must be the kitchen door, so I knocked on the door and the kitchen porter answered. His name was Trevor. And I said, I'm here to see the chef. So he assumed that I had an appointment. So he walked me through this busy kitchen because it was service time and took me to the chef's office. He was studying the form of the horses. And he looked at me and he said, what can I do for you, lad? I said, well, my dad has sent me to look for a job because I leave school on the 17th of March and I'll be ready to start work on the Monday. So the head chef asked me 2 or 3 questions and he gave me a job. It was that simple. And the job was live-in. And so I started on the 20th of March at 7:30 in the morning. And the first job that I was given was the jellified beef stock in those days to pass through a fine sieve. 4 hours later, I was still there in my brand new chef's whites. I was splattered. But you know, I couldn't give up. And the head chef came up to me and said, what are you doing? I said, I'm passing the stock, chef. He said, don't you think you should boil it? So that was part of my initiation. And there's a lot of stories like that, but I'll speed up because otherwise we'll be here all night. And the food wasn't very good. What I did learn was how to be fast, how to absorb pressure, how to say yes, chef, even though I was being screamed at. But my job in the afternoon was polishing the client's shoes. And one day I walked into the hall porter's office where I used to polish them, and there was this little book about so large. And on the front of it, it said the Economy Guide to Hotels and Restaurants in Great Britain. So I started flicking through it, and that's when I realized that restaurants had stars. And the finest restaurant in Britain was a restaurant called the Box Tree in Ilkley in West Yorkshire. And then I said to myself, maybe I should work there. But that's another story. Sorry, Niall.
No, you're grand. It's fascinating to listen to. One of the things that's like we live in a world now where everything's glamorized and very sexy, and Jamie Oliver's tossing herbs and stuff. Like a chef is a really hard job. It's probably one of the hardest jobs out there. Talk us through some of the things that you, like maybe from, 16, 17, getting up to 22. I guess you'd call it an apprenticeship.
Yeah, I mean, I came from the tail end of Escoffier's world. And when I entered the kitchen, every boy and every girl came from a council estate. It was blue collar. It wasn't glamorous. It was very hard, mentally and physically, very long hours. But you did your job. You never looked at your watch. You never called in sick. You never walked out. It was just the way it was in those days.
And is chefing a young person's game, or you obviously own restaurants now and you're more behind the scenes, but we were talking earlier on about if you want to win Michelin stars and you want to get acclaim, you think you probably have to be behind your stove.
I think that's right, but you said it's a young person's game. When I started in the Hotel St. George, there was men of 60 plus cooking the service because that was their job. They went to work. They didn't get the opportunities that we have today. They started in the kitchen and they worked in that kitchen until they were 65 years old. What was your question?
I've actually forgotten myself as well.
Can we ask one of the audience?
No, what I was going to ask you, so we're going to speak...
Oh, that's right. I just remembered. Michelin stars.
Yes.
It's...
Bullshit?
Well, it's very different today. When I was a boy, Michelin was introduced into Great Britain in 1974. When I went to Box Tree in '79, Box Tree was only one of 4 restaurants in Great Britain to have 2 stars in Michelin. There were no 3 stars. There was a scattering of 1-star restaurants. In those days, to win a star, you had to prove consistency over a period of time. And I remember the year I won my 3 stars, I had 12 visits from Michelin. The man who was in charge in those days was a man called Derek Brown. He'd started Michelin. He was there 20-odd years later. He was the man who gave me my 3 stars. He knocked on my door that day and announced it before they announced it to the press. And he then went on to replace the great Michelin in France. So an Englishman to be head of Michelin in France. And he was the one who took the axe to some of those great restaurants which had had 3 stars for years, which had lived off of their laurels. And to win stars in those days was hard. Today, the Michelin, in my opinion, gives stars very easily. I mean, where's the buzz, Niall? Where's the excitement now there was when you were with Conrad? People would bring up, have you heard anything? There'd be a buzz. I think
it's very different. I think instead of having one critic who comes, 4 times a year, you've got 100 critics every night who are on their smartphone. So like the world has changed massively. How important, you said backstage that the only thing matters to you is your customer.
The customers are the stars. They are the stars. If you've got 100 people in your restaurant tonight, you've got 100 stars. Michelin only dish out 3.
Having said that, how big was the bar bill the night you got your 3 stars?
Well, I'm going to disappoint you now. I never drank in those days. I didn't start drinking until I was 38 years old.
Wow.
How boring was I? I remember my first head chef used to have a pint of Guinness on his chopping board in the service.
Were you the stereotypical, there's videos of you on YouTube and different things, were you the stereotypical nasty bollocks of a head chef, or did you build your team? Like, it's very hard to get to, you don't get to 3 stars by being a nice guy.
No, it's what's interesting. It's firstly, I came from a very hard world. And, when you're chef, I remember the first night at the Hotel St. George, my chef de partie, he said to me, he said, Marco, the first thing you've got to learn is service is service. And it's something you don't hear today. And I said to my chef de partie, I said, what's that mean? He says, whatever the chef says to you in the service, you just say, yes, chef. It doesn't matter if he screams, if he shouts at you, he abuses you, he swears, you just say, yes, chef. You never challenge the chef. Because the job is the most important. Because the customers who are spending their hard-earned cash, they want their food to a very good standard. And you don't achieve standards by saying, Walter, when you've got those 2 sea bass, you could send them over. And Peter, you know, the lamb chops on table 15 in your own time. It doesn't happen like that. You know, we had a simple rule. We had a table of 10, for example, with 10 different main courses. The window was 15 seconds. And you don't get that by being fluffy. You have to scream and you have to push and you have to drive. And I live by that simple rule: perfection is lots of little things done well. And that was my rule, and everything had to be perfect. And as I got older, like most people, things become simpler. And my energies went into my food. In the end, I had an infrastructure of 25 chefs around me, so it was different. But in the Harvey's days, Harvey's was the toughest job of my life. The most exciting, but tough. And there I was with 2 cooks trying to produce 3-star food when we first opened. And you have to fight for standards. And the truth is, you don't achieve anything in this world unless you upset people. And who has achieved has upset a lot of people.
Talking about upsetting people, and I guess these are media stories, but there's kind of the stories about you being an enfant terrible in the late 80s, early 90s, making Gordon Ramsay cry.
He did it, it was his choice. I didn't ask him to cry. I didn't instruct him. I didn't say, Gordon, start crying. That was his choice. I used to cry on the 137 bus going home. I never did it in front of Albert. I bit my lip.
But did you see pleasure in mentoring people like that to go on to their own success in the future?
I think it's not about mentoring at that stage in your career. You have a dream, you have a vision, you have a want, and that is to achieve the highest standard, which is 3 stars in Michelin. You've got to get your boys and the girls around you who work with you to follow your dream. It's about your dream. But they become part of that dream, and by becoming part of that dream, a little bit of that dream becomes part of their dream, and they go off and do their own thing. Like when I worked in Gavroche, it was 2 stars, it went to 3 stars. You know, to be part of that team with the great Albert Roux, the first British restaurant to win 3 stars back in '82. Well, you know, you felt wonderful. It must have been like playing with Bobby Moore when he lifted the World Cup. You just think, wow, I was part of that team, whichever little link of that chain you were.
Do you, you've 2 restaurants in Dublin, do you miss the buzz? I know I do, I'm working tech and stuff like that, but I miss the buzz of a service. When you're, like, most normal people who aren't chefs won't understand it, but when you've got 100 people coming in ordering 100 different things and you know every piece of food goes out perfect, do you miss that buzz?
I do, but you know something? I get that buzz from doing other things in my life.
Such as?
Well, it's like I build, for example, I've just finished building an orchard with 450 trees, which was a scrapyard. It's now a beautiful orchard, and every tree is a Mirabelle tree, which I built for my daughter, so it's a Mirabelle orchard. And so I get buzzes out of that. It's like I've just found a Victorian dovecot, which I've restored, you know. So I get excitement from other things. Do I miss the service? There's a part of me which misses the service, but, you know, it's like in 3 weeks' time, I'll be doing the service again, because I go back to Australia to do MasterChef. So I'll be whipping them. It's not quite the same, because some of the food I get is not very nice, and I'm very nice to them. I just lie, delicious. You're so clever. You'll go all the way to the top. You know.
We'll finish. We'll finish up. I'm very conscious, like, we should talk about Dublin.
I was going to say I'm here to talk about Dublin, not me.
Jamie's
it's like loving Marco. Sorry.
Jamie's going to come out and join us now, and we're gonna have a little chat about Dublin. We'll just finish up. That book that you wrote, I wasn't joking when it was the difference between me dropping out of college and going on to be a proper chef was white heat. If you look at it now, it's probably, you know, ridiculously dated, and you know, the sauces and stuff like that are completely different. But like, are you still proud of that work?
And what's interesting about that book? Well, firstly, it's White Heat 25 comes out in February.
Okay. I genuinely didn't know that. It's not a plug.
I thought you were just giving me a plug.
No, I genuinely didn't.
Sell a few more copies.
Yeah.
No, the first half of the book is the original White Heat, and then the second half of the book is a lot of the great photography. Well, the photographer was a man called Bob Cullis-Clarke, who was from Cork. Without question, one of the great photographers of the 20th century, and a wonderful, wonderful man, and unfortunately he's no longer with us today. But, you know, when people say, Marco, you were the first celebrity chef, you know, the bottom line was, I didn't make cooking glamorous. The man who made cooking glamorous was Bob Cullis-Clarke, because he was the man who took those black and white pictures. And so when you think, it was an Irishman who really, in my opinion, created the celebrity chef through his photography. And so in the new book, there's lots of photography which he took. There's one of my favorite ones, which was never used the first time, because in 1990, the world was quite blinkered. There's a large photograph of a chef who complained it was too hot one night in the kitchen. So I cut the back of his jacket out. And I cut his trousers off. And there's a picture of him preparing the hors d'oeuvres. So I insisted that that's one that must take a whole page. It's a funny picture.
Very good. So I think we should give a massive round of applause to Marco, a legend.
Thank you. Thank you, Niall.